Good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar on positioning your product and your brand with Informa Middle East. My name is Megha Bhatia and I'll be taking you through a few administration rules, a few important points before we get on. This webinar will be led by Leland Schaefer. Before we start, I'd like to take you through a few important points. A few housekeeping points that will be of benefit to you. At the end of the webinar, in about a day or two, we will send you a link by email which would contain the link to the slides and to the recording for you to download. At the end of the seminar, we will have a survey that will pop up. Please do take the time to complete this for us. At the end of the webinar, we will allocate time for the speaker to attend to your questions. So please feel free to type your questions throughout the session and we'll get back to them at the end. To start with, I'd like to introduce you to Lee Schaefer, as we fondly call him. Lee has run several courses for us and does a lot of in-house consulting work through Informa Middle East. So he brings in a lot of international as well as regional experience. He's one of our senior associates with Informa, and he's also been, as you can see, the recipient of the AIPMM Trainer of the Year Award. The AIPMM is basically the association that's in the United States of America, which is mainly aimed at product marketing and management. So I'd leave it to him. I'd leave the floor to him now, and I hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you for joining us. Passing it on to Lee now.
Thank you, Megha. I'd like to start by reviewing the webinar objectives. This is what we would like for you to take out of this webinar. We'll review the important aspects of positioning and discuss several common positioning tools and basically equip you to determine the positioning that you might want for a new product and or brand you are launching into the marketplace. And also you can look at the positioning for existing products and brands that you have already out in the market and identify if the positioning is working the way that you'd like it to, and also if you would like to make some improvements. In terms of the topics that we'll cover, we'll go through the 4 key positioning elements, give some suggestions for how to determine your positioning. We'll talk about the Perceptual Map as a powerful tool for understanding how you're positioned in the marketplace and what kind of changes you might want to make. And finally, we'll give you 13 examples of ways that you can position your product and or brand. So with that, I'd like to start by giving you the basic definition of what positioning is. Excuse me, I'll read the words, but then I'll come back and I'll highlight the importance of a number of the words that appear here. Arranging for a product or brand to occupy a clear, desirable, and distinctive place relative to competition in the minds of target customers. And the key words, first of all, arranging. You as the product manager, the brand strategist, want to persuade your target customers that they should give you a certain position. So your job is to persuade them to give you the position that you want them to give you. Ultimately, and I'll just point it out, the statement down here, ultimately the position that you actually get in the customer's mind is up to the customer. For example, you may claim that you're the leader, but if the customer perceives that someone else is the leader, they may not give you that position. But your job is to persuade. The message must be clear, means it's easy for the customer to understand and remember. They don't understand it, they probably won't remember it. If they don't remember it, it won't have any impact. relevant. It has to be desirable and compelling for the customer. Basically, the positioning message sticks and has impact if, in fact, it's relevant and meaningful and resonates with the target customer. It also must be distinctive. Ultimately, the job of positioning is to differentiate yourself from competition in a way that's meaningful to the customer. I'll just point out we have a perceptual map here, and I'll just introduce you to the perceptual map. We will be coming back to it later because it is a very powerful tool. In this case, you've got two axes, convenient, inconvenient, innovative, conservative, and a number of banks that are positioned according to those axes. And this is based on market research. This is a hypothetical example, but in a real example, there'd be market research, and what you'd learn from that is BNY is perceived as being the most convenient and the most innovative bank. So that's a very desirable position to be in. Southeastern Bank, Southeastern First, is the most conservative, but also the most convenient. Also a good position to have. And by the way, I'll just point out on this particular map, the convenient and inconvenient axis is directional, meaning that you want to be more convenient. The more convenience is good, inconvenience is bad. Innovative versus conservative is neither good nor bad. You can be anywhere along that axis and be fine. Some people prefer innovative, some people prefer conservative, but one end of the spectrum is not necessarily better or worse than the other. Four key positioning elements. First of all, the target customer. This would be the market segments for which the positioning applies. And the reason you need to understand who the target customer is that different market segments may and often do require different positionings. They value different parts of your offering in different ways. So you want to be clear, you need to be clear, I would suggest, who your target customer is. You may or may not specify that explicitly in your positioning message. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Frame of reference is, we'll wait for the internet to catch up here. Frame of reference, something that is familiar to the customers that they can use as the basis of comparison. An example of that would be smartphones. You just say you offer a smartphone, and you don't have to explain what a smartphone is. People already know that. So once you say you are offering a smartphone, they'll have their own frame of reference, who the competitors are that are meaningful to them, or who the vendors are, and they will then have a basis for comparing you to what they're already familiar with. A couple of other examples: NBC Action. Basically is a frame of reference for a television channel with action films. A sports car is another frame of reference. I can mention sports car, and I don't need to explain what a sports car is to the target audience. Another way you can express it is the core benefit provided. In the case of smartphones, you could say mobile communications and information. In this particular case, you probably want to say smartphones because that's more familiar to people. But I've got a couple of other examples that illustrate core benefit well. One is pain relief. It's a medication that provides, in this case, arthritic pain relief. And by the way, if you express that as the frame of reference, you don't need to then also say that your target market is people who have arthritic pain. They will know that the message is aimed at them when basically states that you provide pain relief. Same with 5-Hour Energy. It's an energy drink. You don't need to say this is for people who want energy drinks. So in some cases, the positioning elements need to be explicit in the communication you send to the customer. In other cases, it can be implied. Third way is by using the leading or the exemplar product or brand in the category. Here we have three examples, Emirates Airlines, Apple, and Toyota. In this region, I know that comparing yourself directly to somebody by name is illegal, but in many cases it's done by inference. So you can say we are better than the leading airline or whatever your category is, but without mentioning it by name. Apple is certainly a leading brand in many consumer electronics categories. Toyota is also very well known. In each case, the brands are well known, and therefore you can just mention Apple or Toyota, and it's done in many parts of the world, and you don't need to then explain. It's basically a shortcut, and it eliminates a lot of explanation that you would otherwise have to make. We're going to wait for key positioning element number 3. Here it comes. This is very important. Somehow you need to communicate the points of difference. How is your product or brand better than the alternatives in the frame of reference? You've established that you're part of this group of products or group of brands that has certain characteristics. That, by definition, is the frame of reference. But now you've got to say, why buy us versus alternatives that you might have. So it's very important to get a point across the points of difference. Usually that is expressed as a unique selling proposition or compelling value proposition. In the case of brands, very often that is the brand promise that becomes the point of difference. Here we have a couple of examples. HP OfficeJet Pro, 50% less cost than laser. In this example, laser printing would be the frame of reference, and the point of difference is 50% less cost. I cannot believe, or I can't believe it's not butter. The frame of reference is butter, as you might expect. And the point of difference, it's not really clear, but the fact that it says, I cannot believe that it's not butter, implies that it's made out of another substance. So the target market in this case would be people who like butter, but for one reason or another don't want to eat butter. They want a substitute, but they want the taste of butter. And the third example here is Aleve. Its position, this is an ad from the United States. Again, you wouldn't mention competitors by name in this region, but it positions itself against Johnson & Johnson Tylenol. It's basically pain relief, and their claim, their point of difference, the frame of reference here is Tylenol, which is the popular leading brand in this category, and the point of difference is you can get the same effect with many fewer tablets, 2 versus 6. And for many people, that's a huge benefit because they don't have to worry about taking medicines at various other times of the day. And then finally, number 4, which will come up here in just a moment, the reason to believe. In some cases, it's pretty straightforward. In the laser printer example, or the laser 50% less cost than laser, people can go out and compare the prices themselves. So you don't need to spend a lot of time explaining it. But some claims are harder to believe or more subjective, like we're the best, we have the best customer service. A lot of companies may be making the same claim. So what's important is to give some tangible, something tangible that the recipient of the message, or the customer in this case, might be able to grab onto to give them a reason to believe the claim versus simply thinking that it's just another claim that a vendor is making, and everybody says they're the best, everybody says they're highest quality, etc. You give them something tangible to kind of grab onto to reinforce the claim. A couple of ways you can do that: a credible explanation of how the claim is achieved. I'll have an example coming up on the next slide. Third-party awards that reinforce the claim. Ideally, this would be an independent third party, and you can say, we think we're the best airline, but don't take our word for it. We won the Skytrax Airline of the Year award. Customer testimonials and reviews. Just in case you're wondering, the text in the yellow box was not made up. it's real, and it appears on one of the former brochures. Very common nowadays to have star ratings. The internet has increased the power of the word of mouth. In the old days, it would be literally word of mouth. Now you can get reviews of other people's experiences with the brand, the product, through the internet, and that can add credibility. If you see a 4.5 or 5-star rating, that can add credibility to a claim that the vendor might be making. And we're just waiting for the next slide to come up here. This is an example, and I'll show you the full, all the 4 elements, and then I'll show you how Aldi actually takes that positioning message to the marketplace by showing you an actual ad of theirs. But this is the full list of all of the elements. Target customers would be price-conscious replenishment shoppers. The key thing there is replenishment shopper, somebody who goes to restock their pantry of essentials. So it's not somebody who needs to buy a couple of exotic ingredients for something that they're cooking for dinner. It's somebody who wants to restock their pantry once a week, once a month, something like that. Food stores, food is straightforward. Stores is actually a size of venue. It's just to simplify things, I'll just say it's bigger than a mini market and it's smaller than a hypermarket. There's an actual, it's got a particular square footage designation in the retail industry, but it basically implies it's a mid-sized property. Lowest prices possible, that's pretty straightforward. And here's the explanation. The reason we Aldi come up with the lowest possible prices is we only stock, it doesn't appear, but it turned out they only stock about 800 to 900 items versus a typical supermarket, which might have 50,000 items in stock on the shelves. So by only focusing on the 800 to 900 fastest moving items, they can concentrate their purchasing power, and they don't have a lot of inventory, slow turning inventory on their shelves, increasing inventory carrying costs. So part of it is the focus on fewer stock keeping units. They have store brands, and they also eliminate frills. No playground for the kids while the parents shop. No valet parking, which might exist in certain places. Things like that. It's just about getting the products to you. So that would be a logical explanation of how the low prices are achieved. And this is, come up here in just a second, this is an ad which is coming up, which is what Aldi actually sends out to the marketplace. It doesn't have all of these 4 elements of positioning, but what it does basically state very simply, in this example, there's a whole series of these ads. Your taste buds will never know how much you save. So in that statement, you've got basically the key point of difference, the savings, and the other part of the statement is basically communicating the message that even though you are paying less, you're not buying inferior merchandise. You're buying the same merchandise you can get elsewhere, but at a lower price. So that's just an example, and now we'll switch gears and talk about determining your positioning. And that's going to be coming up here in just a minute. Here we go. And there's actually, this kind of shows the overview of the various steps in determining the positioning. And what I'll do is kind of walk through this, and there's a couple of different entry points that you can use in going through this process. One, which is more the kind of the classic textbook approach, is that you identify and specify the target market and market segment that you're going after. That would be step 1. Let's see here. Okay. That's step 1. Step 2 is, given that you have this particular target market segment, what is the key value proposition that is most valued by people in that target market segment? And the 3 tests for the key value proposition is it highly relevant? Is it distinctive? Is this a claim that you can make that nobody else can make? Or, you know, if you're basically claiming something, but a lot of other vendors can claim the same thing, then you're not distinctive and you're not going to stand out. And it's going to be hard to differentiate yourself. Impossible, in fact. And finally, is it believable? It has to be believable. In the short run, it has to be a believable claim, believable sounding claim. In the long run, you have to actually deliver on whatever it is that you're telling people you have. That would be then step 2. Step 3, once you have the target market and the key value proposition, you then develop and communicate the desired positioning. So you put the message together, get it out into the marketplace, and then hopefully the people will be positioning you or putting you in the position that you want them to. So as the final step, after you've been out in the market for a little while, you do the market research to determine how are people actually positioning you in their minds, and that's step 4. You want them to give you a certain position. Are they actually giving it to you? And we'll come back to that in just a minute. I'll just mention, again, it's the kind of the classic textbook approach, but it's very commonly used because the target market is usually customers that you're already selling to. They already know you, you already have credibility with them, they're familiar with you, so you leverage the fact that you already have a relationship with those customers. So number 1 is, in fact, a very common starting point. I have seen examples. I've worked in high tech where there's engineers and scientists running around with new technologies and new ideas, and they create something that's kind of interesting, but they're not quite sure who it's intended for. So first step there is to identify the key value proposition, and that's basically how is this thing that we just invented better and unique in some way, and then work backwards to say, okay, given that this is what this product does better, who is going to want it? In some cases, it's pretty straightforward. In other cases, it might take a little bit of work to identify the exact target market or market segment. But then you basically, once you've done that, you've got what you need to move on to step 3, and then again after a while, you've been out in the market, you then determine how customers are actually reacting. The other entry point is you've got the product, it's out in the market, you do the research, and you find out what position you are actually receiving in the customer's mind. A couple of scenarios might be true in this situation. First of all, the position that you're receiving might be the position that you want to receive. So it's reflective of the position message that you're sending out. That's great. You've achieved your mission, but you can't stop there. You want to reinforce it. You want to try to expand your awareness. So you keep putting the message out. And the other thing is, if it's a desirable position, other competitors are going to want to take that position from you, so you have to defend yourself from encroachment by competitors. But that's a scenario where you're actually getting the position that you want. Another scenario is that the positioning or the position that you receive is different than the positioning that the positioning message you're sending out. So the position that you have is not the position that you wanted to have. And in that case, you have a decision to make. Do you try to change people's minds to convince them that the position that you want to have is what they should be giving you and somehow change their minds? In many cases, that's what companies will do. However, it can be expensive and it can take time and it can be hard to change people's minds once they've given you a position. So another alternative is to ask yourself, is the position that we have good enough? Is it acceptable? Is it something we can work with? We're already there, It's a lot less expensive and time consuming if we just reinforce that. So you basically use the position that you've already got, reinforce it, leverage it, and make the most out of it. The third alternative is you can identify some space in the market where you don't have any competition and establish your position there. So you basically change your positioning away from where the competitive intensity is. I'll show you more about that when we get to the perceptual map as a tool. Which is right about now. Well, I introduced you to the perceptual map at the beginning. We're back to that. Some of the things you can do with the perceptual map is, and what it will do for you is display the current position where you are versus where your competitors are in the customer's mind, collective customers in this case. The green dots and the yellow dot are products or brands, depending. In this particular perceptual map, we've chosen the axes trendy and conservative, luxury and value. A is probably a brand in this particular case, and the position that they have is what they desire to have. So it's where they want to be, it's where they are, so that's great. So again, now they just need to reinforce it and defend themselves from the encroachment of competition. We'll look at B, which is a little different situation. They want to be in the lower left quadrant. They're actually positioned right in the middle, and so now they can decide, do they want to try to change people's minds to get to where they desire to be, or the desired position? Do they accept the position that they're given and make the most out of that? Just looking at this data, I would suggest to you that either one is it's going to be hard because there's competitors all around, so it's hard to differentiate. It's hard to differentiate when you're right in the middle because you're neither value nor luxury, so you're kind of in the middle, so you're not distinctive in any way. Plus, you've got all these competitors circling around you, so it's hard to be differentiated when you've got a lot of cluster of competitors close by. The desired position is a little bit better, but you've still got the problem of differentiation. So one of the choices, just looking at this map, is say we've got nothing out in the, nobody else is out in the upper left-hand quadrant. Let's reposition ourselves there. As long as we decide we want to reposition ourselves anyway, and we have to change people's minds and invest in the time and the resources to do that, let's pick a spot to move people to that is currently unoccupied. So that would be the potential. Now, of course, you need to ask yourself, is that an attractive position to be in? You need to do the market research to validate and verify that, in fact, that position has a sufficient enough market and, you know, it's something that you can satisfy. But there's a lot of benefit in looking at the perceptual map, identifying empty space, and trying to put yourself there. Several maps may be required. Excuse me. We've been showing you two-dimensional perceptual maps, and those basically can allow you to view two attributes at a time. And an attribute may be a variable that people use in making a purchase decision, something that's important to them, like trendy versus conservative, things like that. In fact, there's usually many more than two attributes for a product or a brand that will drive a purchase decision or drive somebody to prefer you over someone else. So you need more than one perceptual map. One perceptual map, a two-dimensional, will get you two attributes, but in order to get a full picture of what's going on in the marketplace, you need to look at all the attributes that are important, and that will generally result in multiple perceptual maps. Here we've got 3. We handle 6 different attributes, A through F. And I've drawn a couple of examples here for you. Scenario 1 is a weak position. For reasons we just discussed, there's competitors all around, so it's very hard to be differentiated when you've got competitors on all sides of you. 2 initially looks good because you're kind of, the brand is out, the product or brand is kind of out away from the competition in kind of one of the corners of the graph, which is a desirable place to be. However, the attributes that distinguish that particular product or brand are not that important to the customers. They don't pass the relevancy test. If you look, the 2 out of 5 means it's a level of 2 importance on a scale of 5. So those particular C and D attributes are not that important to the customers in terms of swaying the purchase decision. So even though there's differentiation, it's not in a particularly relevant way that resonates with the customer. And then 3, of course, is a strong position. These are very important attributes, 5 out of E and F, and 5 out of 5 on the importance scale, and it's clearly differentiated and separated from the competition. And now I'd like to just walk you through how you can use the perceptual map to determine what kind of story, what kind of positioning you want to put out into the marketplace. And for this, we're going to use smartphones as an example. This is actual data, but it's not what I would call rigorous data. It's based on 2 focus groups. I'll call them ad hoc focus groups. They're the result of group exercises that were done in a couple of courses. And these are the results. The raw data basically shows 4 different brands of smartphones. The first graph on the left shows ease of use, power, and speed. The next has price and features, and the one on the right shows quality and innovation. And you can see how the various vendors, Apple, Samsung, Nokia, and Huawei, are positioned according to those different attributes. So what do you do with that information? Well, depends on which vendor you are. If you are Apple, you basically pick the variables or the attributes that allow you to be the most distinguished. And in this case, ease of use and innovation is a very powerful story for Apple to tell because they're distinguished, they're better than Samsung. And Samsung's their main competitor, but it turns out that, that they're in a very desirable spot. They have the same ease of use as Huawei, but Huawei is in a different category of smartphones, so they're not a real competitor for Apple, at least not yet. Excuse me. If you are Samsung, probably the best story you can tell is that you are lower priced than Apple and you're richer in features. Now, if you just look at this particular graph, you might say, gee, but you're still high price. You know, we don't want to go out to the market with a message that says we are toward the high end of the price range. Think of it this way. The frame of reference for Samsung is not all smartphones where they tend to be at the high end of the price range. They're really worried about Apple. So they want to position themselves against Apple. So the fact that they are lower priced than Apple is a good enough story. So if they we'll show you the graph redrawn just with Apple as the frame of reference. How do they compare to Apple? This is what it would look like. Richer in features, lower in price. Nice situation to be in. And finally, if you're Huawei, you come out strong in terms of ease of use and low price. So basically you can tell the story that we have a very easy to use phone at a very low price. And that is the kind of message that you would go out to the market with. So that's basically how you can take raw data from perceptual maps and the market research that leads into those perceptual maps, and then analyze that data and come up with positioning messages. And again, the message is different for different vendors depending on how they're strong and where they're weak. And these are 13 different positioning examples. I won't go through all of them, but these are different ways, and there's certainly many more than 13, but these are 13 fairly common ways that companies can position their brand or their product. Starting with the most tactical, the key features and attributes, product benefits. Price is certainly a good one. A lot of vendors position themselves as bargain or value priced. Generally, you don't talk about being high priced. What you say instead is that you're the status symbol for that particular category. Relative to the leader, here we have Kellogg's. They're the leader in breakfast cereals. Ralston comes along and basically positions themselves directly against Kellogg's, and their value proposition is we have the same product or the equivalent product as Kellogg's, but we have a 25% lower price. And they do as much as they can to try to emulate Kellogg's. In the case of Fruit Loops, it's trademarked, so they have to use Fruit Wheels instead. So basically, and there's a lot of other ways as well, but I will basically end it there and open it up to questions. Actually, before I do that, I'll just kind of summarize the key points I'd like for you to take away from this. Positioning is the act that you would do to establish a desirable position in the minds of the target customers. A position, again, being what they afford to you. And in order to accomplish good positioning, you need to have a message that's clear, relevant to the target customer, and distinctive in that it sets you apart from the competition. We went through the 4 key elements. In many cases, those can be implicit versus explicit, but somehow, somewhere, you need to get across the points of difference that would distinguish you from alternatives that the customer might have to consider. We talked about the Perceptual Map. It's a very powerful tool, both in terms of letting you know how you are currently positioned in the marketplace. You can identify unoccupied space in case you want to change your positioning. And the other thing I'll just mention now, we didn't talk about it earlier, is if you do the perceptual maps periodically, you will detect changes in the marketplace. You'll detect trends. Maybe the competitors are encroaching on you. Maybe the market expectations are changing. So it's good to do this periodically. And finally, there's a variety of attributes that can be used to position a product or a brand. So you choose the one that tells the best story on your behalf. Gives you the greatest clarity, relevance, distinctiveness. Okay, with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. I'm going to wait just a minute here for the question box to open. Okay, we have one question. I've been doing positioning, and I've heard of this phrase called points of parity. You talked about points of difference. What are points of parity, and how would we use those? Points of parity are actually examples of how you are similar or identical to other products in the frame of reference. So you might use points of parity as, one common use of points of parity is to establish how you are like products in another class of product, another category, very commonly used by automobile manufacturers, for example, where they say we have a kind of a value-priced car, but we have features that you would normally find in luxury cars. So we have parking assist technology, parking assist radar. We have a very quiet interior that's like a Lexus. We have Cadillac-like features, things like that. So you basically establish points of parity with, in this case, luxury cars, and then your point of difference is that you're in a much lower price category. So you can get the same features you would normally pay for a lot of money for in a luxury car, you can get at a much lower price. Another use of points of parity is if your competitor is basically using a particular attribute as a point of difference. They're saying you are different, they are different than you in some way. You want to try to close that gap by using points of parity, by saying we actually are more equivalent than you, than the competitor might lead you to believe. An example of that is American Express and Visa. Visa will use a point of difference with American Express by saying we are accepted in more places than American Express or than this other card, depending on what part of the world you're in. You can use American Express by name. So the way American Express might respond is to use points of parity and say we are accepted in virtually all the places that the leading card, you wouldn't say leading card in this case, we are accepted in 99% of the places, and you don't have to worry about being refused in a particular establishment. A third way that you might use points of parity is if you're a newcomer and you're not well known, you're not well established, you can use points of parity to say we do in fact belong in this particular frame of reference. This is why we should belong to the club. Okay, another question. You talk about positioning your product and your brand. What's the difference, and when do you position the product, when do you position the brand? In general, I mean, there's all different scenarios out in the world, but in general, a brand has multiple products and usually multiple product categories selling under it. So the brand becomes the more strategic positioning. And the brand also has more dimensions. The product tends to be more features and benefits. Those tend to be the attributes that distinguish the product. The brand also has things like personality and value, core values that can be used to position a brand versus the competition. So the brand I would consider to be the strategic positioning. You want to establish that first. It's also the most persistent. Products can come and go. Product generations can come and go. And competitors can catch up with features pretty quickly. The brand is a longer lasting positioning. So what I would say is the brand would be the strategic positioning. You want to do that first and then position the products within the brand. You certainly want to position the products against each other in a product line, but also you then, on a more tactical basis, you position your product features and benefits versus the competitor's product features and benefits. But you start with the branding, you establish that, that's where you have the most leverage, and then, so the branding is strategic, and I would classify the product positioning as being more tactical. Okay. I guess that'll about do it. So I'd like to thank you all for attending, and hope you got a lot out of the webinar, and hope to see you in future webinars.